Conducting psychotherapy with adolescents can be interesting. It presents some challenges that you won't find when working with more mature clients. We traveled to Lexington, Kentucky to speak with Paul Dalton, a therapist who works with adolescents a great deal. Let's hear what he has to say about this challenging topic.
Okay, my name is Paul Dalton. I am a counselor here in Lexington, Kentucky, and we have a big multidisciplinary practice where I enjoy most working with adolescents. I started doing that for a big mental health system here in town where I ran an intensive outpatient program for substance abusing kids. But one thing I learned a long time ago about working with adolescents is that if you are going to be successful, you're going to have to work with families and you're going to have to be able to work with parents. I had a provider once that told me, Paul, I like working with kids, but I don't really want to work with parents. I said, yeah, I'm not hiring you. And I didn't hire them because what I find is that sometimes when people think, hey, I want to work with kids, that you're not going to be working with parents. What I find is the opposite's true. If you're going to make long-lasting change in a teenager's life, you're going to have to work with families. And I think that's one thing that I really love about it. And you're probably going to have to do marital therapy and or have somebody on your staff or that you know very well to refer those people to, because the adolescent a lot of times is carrying the weight of that marriage around, or is the symptom carrier, as we kind of learned in graduate school maybe. I think the things that really make adolescents unique are the flexibility. The mind's growing, the brain's developing, and they're making choices and decisions probably based a lot more on experience, their peer groups, their parents. And so they're still trying to figure it out. And I think a lot of times when we give them a good idea, they'll look at it a lot longer than adults usually do, and they'll explore it. And if we can give them any kind of proof, any kind of just a little glimmer of change that will produce a better feeling or a better thinking pattern, most of the time they'll take it. And that, I think that's one of the greatest things about working with them. The things that I've seen on the rise in adolescents and their mental health and substance abuse problems have clearly been two things here in Kentucky. The opiate epidemic here in Kentucky has sparked, me seeing people as young as 13 that have tried heroin. In 2000 and 2005, that was unheard of. I hadn't seen any teenagers that had ever tried that drug. And it's really been just a scourge, the fentanyl and heroin problems that I've seen, and how quick they can get a teenager to their knees. And that links right up with the other problem, and that would be the suicide rate of teens. It's alarming to see people as young as 10, 12, and 14. Well, I think when you're working with suicidal teenagers, that say they have some suicidal ideation, or that are in that ballpark where they're kind of saying, well, I could or I might. My job is to make sure that I go on the words that I hear, and I use everything that I can, and I try to get collateral sources. And I look at all of those things, but I've never hesitated to put someone in the hospital or to call the fire department. Here in Lexington, you call 911, the fire department comes, they pick you up and they take you. I've always wanted to be on the safe side of that. I think I do see a lot of people playing games and to get attention. I've also, had a teenager in the waiting room of the psychiatric hospital before and had a parent call me and say, Paul, we're going to admit her. And I said, don't do that, bring her over to my office. I knew what that was. And I think normally, when I'm working with these teenagers trying to figure out where that line is, a lot of times I will ask them to get that initial response. I'll look at them and I'll say, hey, do you think that's something that is important for a parent to know? And it's surprising how many times that question alone stops them and they go, uh-oh, it's probably important, but I don't want you to tell them. And I'll say, well, I understand you don't want me to, But let's talk about that a little more. And most of the time, what I can get to is a place that we can make a deal. And normally the deal is that they're going to tell them some way, somehow. Those people are going to be informed because the parents are in charge of their medical care. And if we're in a spot like substance abuse, where I need to get them into some treatment or some kind of medical care, I have to have the parents on board. And so, it's one of those things where what's in their best interest, is kind of back here in my mind, and then what do they want? And I think that's a tough balance for anybody. At the end of the day, though, I want to make sure I'm on the right side of that. And I can usually, even if I have to take a step further than they want to go, it's about trust. Normally when we talk to the teenagers about confidentiality and the limits, I usually have kind of two areas. So one is the law, and I'm pretty firm on that. Hey, if you're thinking about hurting yourself, or it gets down to where I think you're going to, and or if you're thinking about hurting someone else, those are things that immediately we're going to call in a parent. We're going to call in the proper people to take care of you, and there's not going to be any negotiation about that. And I think they understand that pretty well. The other part is when I think a teenager's life could be put in danger, but it doesn't meet the limits or the laws. And so normally how I handle that is I'm always going to be in communication with their parent, not necessarily about the content of therapy, but certainly about the progress. And I always meet with the parents to gather developmental history. And my ultimate goal with working with teenagers is always to get a family session. So I'm going to talk to them about, hey, if you're doing things that are inherently dangerous, that's not something I'm going to keep from your parents. Now, you can tell them, which is what I prefer. So I normally will say to them, hey, that's something I want you to talk to your parent about, or we're going to all get together really quick. Or I can call them, but I don't like to tattle on people. I don't like to backdoor communication with parents. So why don't you tell them and then let them call me and tell me that you've told them. When I see teenagers, I always see the teenager first, and I do not meet with the parents until after that. And I always meet with them after that. So when they're there, they make their follow-up appointment. That might be 2 hours later or a day or two later. Most of our teenagers come because their parents want them to come, and in some cases they're referred by probation or a judge or the legal system. And one of my common, little pieces of my lecture would be, hey, listen, you're here. Since you're here, let's do something productive that you might want to do. And if we touch on what they want to do, then maybe we'll make them happy and you'll be happy and we'll all get out of here alive. And normally that makes them laugh, gets them relaxed, and they realize that I'm in it for them. And I usually say, hey, you don't know me well enough to trust me, but you will trust me because I'm going to be the exact person that I tell you I'm going to be. Well, when I'm working with teenagers, I always have a goal, and I usually tell the teenagers up front, hey, listen, during that first session even, I say, listen, part of what we're probably trying to do here is to get you in here with your parents. And I usually get the look right away, and I go, hey, it's not going to be today. But if I'm going to make a long-lasting change in your life, and I'm really serious about doing that, in my professional opinion, we got to do that with your family in here. And so usually after I see a teenager 4 to 6 times, we're working hard on, hey, when is that going to be? And I try to prepare them for it up front. And I always keep my word with them too. I said, hey, I'm not another parent. So your parents aren't going to come in and everybody's going to beat you up. We're going to have goal identification, and then we're going to move toward that, and you'll have a big say in how that goes. Well, I think humor is an extremely important tool, and I think if you have a good connection with your clients, you can take a risk on that. And I've had some of the most serious sick people on the planet crack open because of something we've got to. I think you have to be able to lighten the mood up. You have to have that breaker in there sometimes. I think it's a critical part of it. I think it's the human part of it, because people are certainly going to cry in your office. And I think it's important for us to be able to take them to the other end of that and get them to laugh and sometimes to not take things so seriously that they can understand that, hey, if I have a different perspective and I can get some humor on this, maybe I can get on top of it. So alexithymia, for me, that's a pretty fancy word. I had to look it up, but it really refers to a lot of the younger kids that we work with, the adolescents, of kind of not being aware, not really knowing how to look at those feelings and process them, and not really being able to express them. And when I'm working with teenagers, I always try to find the one or two things that when they talk about it, they're going to light up and I can sit back and let it go. Normally, that's in the middle of the first session. And I usually ask them questions. What do you like to do for fun? And I'll go through all of their activities, but normally their cues, they're easy to pick up. And the last client, it was his lacrosse. And as soon as I asked him about lacrosse, he went on a tear. So I know that any session that we come to, and there's a little tricky part, if I start asking him about that, it's going to loosen him up a little bit. And then I think it's a skill, and as a clinician, we've got to be aware that if we ask them, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll say, well, I feel, and then the very next thing that comes is some cognitive stuff that they've put together. And so sometimes I'll say, well, you just told me how you think, which is great, or what you're doing, but I'm asking a little bit more about a feeling. I think you have to be really creative too about doing expressive or experiential therapy with teenagers. One of the first things I used to do was we would go walking, and my boss probably didn't like it, and I didn't really care because the results were great. We walked and we talked, and another thing that we did is we did recreational day, and during that day we would cook, we'd play kickball, we'd do a lot of other things, and they didn't know we were doing therapy, but boy did I learn a lot on those days.